Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, where we engage in pro-social conversations about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This week, Elizabeth is joined by Mike Burke for a discussion about the neuroscience of polarized attitudes. A recent article suggests that regardless of which side of the political aisle we inhabit, those at the most extreme ends of the ideological spectrum exhibit the most neural synchrony effects. Mike and Elizabeth talk about the implications of these similarities, as well as other examples of what is often called horseshoe theory, which suggests that those at the far ends of the political spectrum may view the world through a shared lens. Mike describes his own recent article in which he argues that too often those who claim to be the defenders of Western civilization seem not to notice that they are the ones burning it down from within.
Okay, hello everybody. It's been a while for me. Welcome back. Today we are discussing, what's the name of the paper?
Politically extreme individuals exhibit similar neural processing despite ideological differences.
Quite.
Yes.
So, before we kind of go into the academic jargon and the paper itself, it may be worth kind of revisiting some stuff that we've done in the past. Also, some of the stuff that we've noticed. So, for example, I've anecdotally noticed that far-right types behave in a very similar way to far-left types. That, purely anecdotally. And we have explored papers that have said that psychologically they seem to be quite similar as well. I think you were initially very skeptical of those papers. And then after we recorded, you were still skeptical, but maybe a little bit less skeptical as you were when we set out. Would that be fair?
I don't know. Well, I guess I wouldn't say that they behave the same. I don't know that I agree that they behave the same, but I think that we have been on the same page that there are similarities in thought processes. With some of the, but I don't necessarily think that we've ever thought that they had the same attitudes or the same necessarily. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Is it worth? Is it worth me giving an example of how I think that they behave the same? Or certainly behave in a very similar way when it comes to certain stimuli. So, the most famous incident right now has been the tragic shooting of, I think he was 31 years old, early 30s, Charlie Kirk, a conservative commentator, somebody I didn't agree with on quite a lot, somebody I was briefly in contact with. But whatever we think about him, I think, as moderates, we could say those disagreements, that's not the place for fists, let alone shootings and let alone death. I feel that right-leaning moderates and left-leaning moderates would all, again, this is anecdotal, but I feel they would all agree on that. No? Yes?
Maybe,
Probably. Again, we don't have data, but I think, stuff like this, it's fairly safe to be quite confident on. So there's two things that I've noticed in the response to his death. One has been people celebrating it. Two has been that's on some people on the crazy left. Two has been people turning him into a saint. Like in the same way they turned George Floyd into a saint. So many people on George Floyd was a career criminal by all intents and purposes. Did that mean he deserved to die? Of course not. But he was turned into a saint, and we're seeing the same thing happening with Kirk. I mean, to be fair, Kirk's a lot more saint-like than Floyd, but he's not a saint. And the second thing that I'm saying is the blaming of the left. So one of the most prominent conservative, and I use the term loosely, voices in America is a chap called Matt Walsh. Are you aware of him?
Mm-mm.
You know that documentary, What is a Woman? Have you heard of that one?
Mm-mm.
He's one of the most famous conservative political commentators in America. So he's the heart of the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is a lot more sane than he is. So, he's kind of knocking on the door of Ben Shapiro level of fame. So very, very prominent, very, very, very influential person. And he basically said in the immediate aftermath to this, horrible murder, that he can't unite in any way with the left because the left want to kill him and his wife and his children and then spit on their graves. As if, on the one hand, as if the left was some whole kind of politically coherent movement. And we have to bear in mind that, not even Soviet premiers with gulags, intelligence networks, secret police, infiltration of key institutions within the United States and the United Kingdom, not even they could get the left, everybody who sees himself on the left to mark in lockstep, let alone justify the murder of people. The left as it exists is a mess of very different and often competing groups. And I think that to say that, we can describe the left as this thing that everybody who is, and this is what he seems to imply by what he says, that everybody who is left leaning in America has kind of signed off on that murder, is not simply dangerous and obviously wrong. It also kind of reflects the whole white silence is violence. If you're not with us, you're against us stuff. The lists that were created about theaters that didn't adequately support Black Lives Matter in the early days of the George Floyd protests, and all those kinds of things that we saw on the left in 2020. That's one example of something that we're seeing on the right in 2025. And it's not just him. The richest man in America, your favorite person, Elizabeth. You're a big fan, I hear. Elon Musk came out and said, they want to kill us. The only choice is fight. Again, or something along those lines. And it doesn't sound like, maybe I've misread him, but when you say they want to kill us, the only choice is fight, that doesn't sound like fight in the metaphorical sense. And that sounds like fight in quite a literal sense. And even if he did mean it in a metaphorical sense, the way in which he's phrased it is mean that it will be interpreted in a literal sense. And it's exactly the kind of thing, this kind of justification of violence, or if perceived justification of violence, is exactly the kind of thing that we saw on the left around about 2020, when Facebook memes were popping up in my feed saying, if you've got a problem with the way that they're protesting, with an image of burning cars and stuff, then you're part of the problem. That, that political violence was justified, and we're seeing these justifications on the right now. So in that terms of behavior, I think those are two contemporary examples. Another one, a final one that I'd give you from the UK would be Carl Benjamin, who's one of the most influential, in air strokes, conservative philosophers in the UK, and also majorly internationally influential too. And he said, again, making the same ontological mistake, the left are turning mentally ill people into murderers. Okay, again, who are the left? It's a version of this them conspiracy theory. And I think that that's a very key philosophical similarity and a very consequential one.
Okay, so I had sent you this article. Politically extreme individuals exhibit similar neural processing despite ideological differences, in part because we have had conversations, kind of about this. Well, maybe the attitudes aren't exactly the same. Some of the outcomes are the same. And we've certainly wondered if people were more similar, and maybe talked about the horseshoe theory, right? More similar, the two extremes more similar than they are different. And this particular research project was, unique in that, look, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't
Neither am I.
explain. Yeah. So I'm sure that you struggled a little bit with this article. I certainly struggled a little bit with it, but they did their due diligence in terms of fMRI, in terms of galvanic skin response, which is a stress response, the transmission of basically current, through our bodies. They did, various different kinds of analyses of different parts of the emotion, the sort of the emotional response areas in the brain, and found, in fact, what what you and I have, and many others. We are not alone
No.
in suggesting this, but I'm just going to skip down basically to their conclusion, which is, although political ideology is an important contributor to synchronized neural responses, the synchrony effect was observed even in those who do not share ideology, but are only similar in how extreme their views were. So these people were shown video of Mike Pence and Tim Kaine. So this was back in the Clinton-Trump campaign. So this data was collected in 2019, and they were shown the same video clips, and they were eye tracked. So what were they paying? Were they paying attention? And what were they paying attention to? They had the galvanic skin response, and they were collecting data on blood flow and other fMRI kinds, other available data. So, I mean, again, this was, and you mentioned moderates. One of the interesting findings was that moderates basically had much less activity going on, and other research on, the moral, who's is it? Jonathan Haidt's moral, the five moralities. Now I can't think of the name of it. It'll come to me. But the idea is that left to people who tend to be more liberal are very concerned about two of the morals. The right is very concerned about all, and the moderate tends to be like, it depends. So yeah, I'm interested in morality, but I'm interested in the morality that applies in the moment, and I'm a little more loosey goosey. So similar, I would say that these findings sort of are similar in that they found that the moderates had much less extreme responses to any of the stimuli, and were more also more like each other and more different from either extreme. So that's my very brief summary. I will entertain questions. If you have specific questions, I can try to answer them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the neuroscience stuff didn't make a lot of sense to me. Galvanic skin responses are things that I've heard about, but I had to kind of go on the Wikipedia page to figure out.
A little, have you ever had the little pulsometer put on your finger at the doctor's office? It's not the same thing, but it's just that easy. They can check your pulse by just putting a little thing on your finger. Well, this is a very similar kind of thing. Have you ever had a body fat test where they put two sensors on your body and put a little electrical current through to see how much body fat you have? It's very simple, just like that. It's just these two little sensors, and so it's not nearly as invasive as getting into an fMRI machine or anything like that. But what else? What else could I help explain to you that would also help listeners understand?
So I'm going by my notes here. They seem to make the case that extremism isn't really a reasoned ideology. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that they would sort of be coming to that conclusion. Yes, as far as the brain is concerned. Yeah.
I mean, I should clarify that it might be very highly reasoned, in the sense that somebody might be able to articulate very good justifications for everything in a very rational way. So it's not that it's not reasoned in the sense that it isn't reasoned by the persons who are articulating it,
like you said, but
it's not primarily. That's not what's happening first. That it seems to be a reaction first, an emotional reaction first.
Right.
Would that be a fair take away from this paper?
Yes, and that would actually be supported in psychology more generally, is that all emotions, despite our reasoned experience of our emotions, all emotions physiologically are exactly the same. And that we use the environment to interpret how we're feeling physiologically in the moment. And so, yes, I would say that they are suggesting that ideological extremism is experienced in the brain and the body very similarly. And then people are using their sort of, conscious thoughts about the environment to explain their physiological reactivity. Yes.
And is it worth pointing out that they're not generally aware that that's what they're doing?
Correct. And we are not, right? Like if we're already kind of in a grouchy mood and then we bump our funny bone. Do you all call it the funny bone too?
Yes,
In
yes.
the UK? Yeah, okay. If we bump our funny bone and we're already in a bad mood, then it actually hurts more than if we're in a good mood and we bump our funny bone. So yeah, it's very subjective. Yes.
And this might be true for individuals of different degrees, right? We're not making the blanket statement that all people who manifest extremist views haven't thought them through, and that's not the reason why they're coming to those views. We're talking about a general trend that we're observing.
Boy,
That's a
it
difficult
is
question, isn't
pretty.
it?
It is, because it is pretty universally, you know, experience. Emotions. I say emotions. The physiological, the brain responds before and below our level of awareness. So it is a lot harder to. We basically are not in control of our non-conscious processing and can't access it. So I'm not sure your question is
Okay,
answerable.
so let me rephrase the question. I'll give you a specific example. Yesterday, I was at a event, and I got in line in a queue to buy something for my younger son, a sweet thing for the younger son. And as I got in the queue, I got in the first place in the queue because there was nobody in the queue. The guy didn't notice me because he was counting the money. So, counting the money that he's got. He
He's
probably
very
thought,
focused.
there's nobody in the queue, so here's a good opportunity for me to count my money. And he didn't notice that I'd come to the front of the queue. Or I had begun to make a queue because there was no queue. And when he looked up, there was a queue of people had formed behind me. And he just assumed I had jumped the queue and told me to go to the back.
Okay.
And then the worst thing was there was some kind of, let's just say, a low-class individual who was a couple of places behind me who knew that I was at the front of the queue and knew that I had got to the front of the queue because he had joined after I'd been there. And he started wildly gesticulating in an aggressive way, implying that I jumped the queue when he knew that I hadn't jumped the queue. So psychologically, Elizabeth, what would be going on in my head at that moment?
I mean, again, I guess this is different, right? You're thinking yourself into an emotion versus already having had
Well, I mean,
a
I was confronted with an aggressive behavior over
right,
something
right.
that I
And so
hadn't
you're in the
done.
fight or flight mode, right?
So
And
immediately I'm not
yeah.
thinking about this. But what happens is at that point is that I'm going into more of the fight than flight mode.
Sure.
But I didn't. And I could feel all of those kind of. I didn't need galvanic skin responses. I could feel my heartbeat speeding up. I could feel aggression surging in me. I could, it was all very palpable to me. But in that instance, and I think this is true for most people when they go into kind of an instance like that one, they nevertheless manage to rein that fight or flight instance in.
Oh yeah, this is not to suggest that we can't that we can never control ourselves. But before you were even aware of any of those things happening, before you were aware of any emotion that you could label, your body was responding.
Of course.
So,
Yep.
and your brain was responding. It is much faster than our ability to to understand it, to name it, And the exact same response can be labeled lust, that can be labeled anger, because the physiological and the brain response is the same. So
that's really good, but I think this is, and I know that you get all of this, but the reason I'm dragging this out is because there could be people who listen to this and think, well, it's all a done deal, right? That the brain has that instant response, and therefore, this is something that we're completely out of control over. We're
but we
not.
label it, right? And I think that's kind of what I'm suggesting. Those exact same responses can be labeled excitement and positivity. And so this is kind of what these researchers are arguing too, is that because they had shown them specifically a political stimuli, and people had their labels for their their responses, that they chose those labels, right? And that the extremes then were what.
So, almost ironically, then, something that is considered to be intellectual, in a sense that you would naively think that most political positions for most people tend to be well thought out. I don't think that's
Right.
true, but
No.
certainly, I
think
certainly
we
think,
all convince ourselves that most of everything that we do is well thought out. It's
most people would think that of all the things in their lives that are well thought out, their ideological position is probably one of the foremost among them, I would think.
one of them, sure.
No, I don't think that it is, again, but I think that they would think that.
Mhm.
And so, ironically, then, something that we label intellectual is, in a way, or seems to be, better bypassing the intellectual block on compulsive behavior. So,
Mhm.
for example, if we give the example of the stall where I mislabeled somebody who's jumped the queue and somebody's acting aggressively, it's my mind, comes in with consequential philosophy. For example, what are the negative consequences going to be if I punch this guy, and therefore I'm not going to do it? That intellectual judgment that intervenes and overrules the physiological response, right?
Mhm.
Whereas with the ideological, something that is labeled as intellectual, that intellectual label is, in a way, or may in a way be better contributing to that compulsive behavior. Is compulsive the right word?
Well, I think that's beyond the scope of this, of this article. I mean, I can't refute that, but I think that's beyond, anything that they wrote, and I think it's beyond, I think, I can't refute it. I think it's possible.
So when what they're talking about, I mean, the reason why I say that is because they seem to say that it's that extremism is not about reasoned ideology, and that's why I'm trying to make this distinction between reasoned ideology and effective reality. So fear, anger, and outgroup hate.
Yeah, they definitely suggest that it isn't political ideology that's driving the emotional response. They're suggesting that the emotional response is driving the political extremism.
So I mean, I don't think it's that big a leap between what I suggested before. That there is.
No, I'm not saying either. I just don't think they're saying it. That's all.
Oh,
I
okay,
don't
fair
think-
enough. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they
It's beyond what they've said.
could have said it. Okay, so
So they said the body's arousal system likely plays a critical role in shaping the most extreme perspectives. That's what they say.
Mhm.
So,
okay, so here's some of the key points. Then they suggest that extremism is affect driven,
mhm.
right? That most participants don't show a heightened love for their in group, but rather a heightened hate for the out group. What do you
Yeah.
think of that?
I think we're seeing that in the environment right now. And I mean, you're in Japan, which people might forget. And so the accent set aside, you grew up in the UK, but you're now in Japan. Certainly, though, in the US, where I am, we're in a mess. I think driven partly by this. Are you seeing it where you are? What are you seeing in the UK?
Well, I mean, I'm in Japan, but I'm also in the US and I'm in the UK in a kind of weird sense. I'm a kind of a ghost in the machine.
Yeah.
I'm constantly talking with often leading figures in the UK and the US. Yeah, I'm seeing absolute rage, and I'm seeing anger that is completely misdirected and was misdirected from the very first broadcast that revealed that this guy had been murdered, where suddenly everybody knew. Now the guy's been arrested, and it looks like he comes from a conservative background, but he himself is a left-wing extremist.
I don't
But
know. I have not followed it, so I can't.
it's
I can't
and
comment.
I'm being very calm about this because I'm only saying that seems to be the case. I'm still reserving judgment. But immediately after it happened, everybody knew, not everybody, but loads of people on the right knew exactly why this had happened, why he did it, the ideology that had compelled him to do it, that if he was mentally ill, then that didn't matter because he had been brainwashed irregardless by the ideology. This outgrouping, this absolute outgrouping.
Well, you recently wrote an article for Queer Majority that was relevant to this, I think. The Kremlin's LGBT smokescreen, how the radical right fell for Russia's trap.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they've been doing. I mean, it's the classic. I mean, we've spoken about this before, and I've written about this before. I mean, one of the reasons why, I mean, one the delicious irony about the whole thing about writing for a gay magazine is that I, had my career severely damaged over bogus allegations of homophobia, and now the irony of ironies is that I'm writing for a leading gay magazine,
Right.
which I think is absolutely delicious. So, yeah, I mean, what we've seen with Kremlin propaganda, and it's no different here, by the way. The Kremlin can't, or at least hasn't yet been able to invent political schisms within the West whole cloth. What they do is they find minor cuts and they infect them. So there's Pew data on this, there's all kinds of data on this, but if you really don't need to look, it's very, very easily attainable. If you look at, there's tons of data going back to, I think, the 1950s. If you look at attitudes towards same-sex couples, for example, you can see within the Anglosphere, so Britain and America, you can see massive shifts over time, to the point where if you look in about 1950, most people would be suspicious of gay people, and if you look at 2015, most people aren't. And most people aren't today too, because the radicalization hasn't crept in that far yet. But what you can see is you can see that certain narratives begin to crop up within the West, and we've come head to head with one of them, right? One of them is this idea that there is a gay conspiracy theory. I remember somebody saying to us, and you were credulous and quite angry, and reasonably so, I think, that, and I think the person said, and we challenged them, I'm not against gay people. There are plenty of lovely gay people around, and they're fine, and I don't want them to be damaged in any way. However, there is a conspiracy, an active conspiracy, and I thought that this was rubbish. I didn't believe it to be true. In order to turn kids gay. And that might sound fantastical, and I can see that to somebody who hadn't read the information that it might appear fantastical, and I'm not blaming you for not believing it or not taking me seriously at this stage. But this is in UN documentation, in United Nations documentation. Now, this is black and white. And this was said straight-faced by a person who clearly believed what they were saying. Now, if there had have been a United Nations plot to turn the kids gay, maybe her reaction would have been appropriate. But we looked into it.
We did our due diligence. We really...
and there was nothing of the sort. And there's nothing of the sort. And that is not to say, because here again, it's
I'm not sure what
I,
the point would be, even if it as I look back, like I wonder why I didn't ask. What exactly would the point be? What
oh, I can tell
of
you.
doing it?
No, I can
Oh
tell you. I can tell you what the point is. So it's part of the Great Replacement theory. Have you heard
no,
about that?
but yes, but well,
So
anyway,
you,
it
you,
it
you
doesn't.
crash you crash populations, right? You stop men and this weird thing, right? So when gay marriage became legal in the United Kingdom, it didn't mean that suddenly I started evaluating all of my old male friends in an entirely different light. I was like,
Right.
"Oh, Brian," that didn't happen. And so, but nevertheless, the argument is that okay, that if we are overly permissive towards gay people, that men will marry men and women will marry women, and the birth rate will collapse, and then we can be replaced by foreigners.
No, we can't be no, the point is though, if there's a
I'm not saying it's
worldwide,
true. I'm not
I know,
saying
but I'm
it's
just
so.
saying, like, if there's a worldwide conspiracy, there'll be no one to be replaced by because
Elizabeth,
there won't be any
Elizabeth,
procreation.
Elizabeth. May I? No, they're immune because they're
Am I being too
Islamists.
logical?
They're immune because they're Islamist would be the answer of
Oh,
somebody of one of these people who could think. Most of them can't. But I'd just bring you back to the paper, and I would say that ideology is affect driven rather than thought
yes.
through, right?
Yes.
So this is kind of
So there would have
reinforcing one
been,
of the
so I
points.
shouldn't be sorry that I didn't ask that question because it wouldn't have mattered
Well,
anyway.
no,
That's right.
it wouldn't matter, but they, the more intelligent among them would have thought out an answer, and they would have said yes, but obviously,
Yes.
Islamists are completely immune to LGBT indoctrination, and therefore they will keep having kids, and we will be replaced. But again, I just because that kind of sounds like it might be vaguely reasonable in some abstract hellhole that they've constructed in their minds, doesn't mean that it's not primarily emotional, and the whole thing is emotional.
Right.
But it's worth giving the devil his due, because I don't think that because so much of this stuff is affect driven, because it's so much of an emotional response. I don't think that there are people on the left and right that really understand how propaganda works. So, and how, and this is crucial to understanding how the affective hook, if you like, digs in. And this isn't something that's explored in the paper, but I think it's something that is important that we talk about here. When you talk, so there's a great scene in one of my favorite movies, and I've talked about this with you before, The Exorcist. And you've got the older priest, Father Damien, and the younger priest, Father Michael. And they're going in to exorcise this girl, exorcise the demon out of the girl. And he warns I think it's Father Michael, I might get them mixed up, but the older priest warns the younger priest, we must not converse with the devil. We may ask it things that are relevant, but we've got to be really careful not to have a conversation with it, because the devil likes to confuse. It will lie. But worse, it will mix lies with the truth. The effect is powerful and psychological. So don't listen, Damien. Don't listen. And that's almost Dostoevsky-ish in kind of its insightfulness. When you apply that to propaganda. So you look at, for example, the rape of young English girls by gangs of predominantly ethnically Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslims within the United Kingdom that were covered up by social services and the police because they didn't want to be labeled racist. Well, that actually happened. Similarly, you look at gang violence in the United States being caused by groups like MS-19. Now, before we go to contextualize these things, which is something that we ought to do, that also happened too. Even if you look at the gay grooming stuff, do you see homosexual sexual predators behaving in absolutely abysmal ways? Yes, you do. These things are all true, but there's a but, right? So, okay, so you've got MS-19 operating in the United States. Is that true? Yes. Do you want those people in the United States? Absolutely not. Does it follow that there is a whole conspiracy designed at introducing criminality? No. Similarly, in the United Kingdom, do these Muslim grooming gangs, have they existed and do they exist still now? Yes. Is it a disgusting, huge problem? Yes. Should you be angry about it? I am. Does it follow that therefore all immigration into the United Kingdom can be labelled a massive failure? No, absolutely not. Not even Pakistani immigration into the United Kingdom can be labelled a failure because of these people acting. As terrible as the problem is, and as awful as the cover up within different communities has been, we still can't. It's still a huge non sequitur to jump from A, we've got this problem that we need to deal with, and B, therefore, we can start saying that whole groups of people are guilty. Clearly they aren't. But this is how this affective thing is triggered. It's triggered by genuine examples of horror, genuine things that it's not unreasonable to be outraged about. And then this whole intellectual architecture is constructive upon this shaky in the intellectual sense, effective foundation, but rock solid in the emotional sense, intellectual foundation. And that's how the propaganda is working. And it's also worth pointing out that the Kremlin, we can observe this with immigration, we can observe this with LGBT. It doesn't pick sides, right? It picks wounds and it infects them, right? It causes them to fester. So with George Floyd, we saw them inflaming the worst sides of Black nationalist rhetoric, right? We saw them, and at the same time, they were also inflaming Trump rallies, right? In order to not empower one side over the other. They wouldn't want that. They wouldn't want the Black side or the Trump side to win. They want them both as angry with each other as possible, so that they have this very strong, effective filter. Again, intellectually shaky, but emotionally strong, effective filter, so that they can just demonize each other. Because once you do that, then violence becomes expected, right? As it is, going back to what I said at the beginning, as now people like Elon Musk are making clear, or I think he's making clear, we have to fight now. They're trying to kill us. Matt Walsh. They're trying to kill us and spit on my grave and my children's grave. I can't unite with these people. It's the intellectual foundation of this is extremely shaky, but the affective foundation is very, very strong. And the Russians are absolutely laughing along as they use all of their bot armies to amplify this content and push it into everyone's feeds. And the funny thing is that the likes of Matt Walsh is not an idiot. He's not stupid. Carl Benjamin in the UK is equally, someone I've had interactions with, is not stupid. And yet these people are fanning the flames. I mean, here's the question I want to ask you. I am as susceptible to all of the same emotions as they are. When I see things like this, I get a bit angry to begin with. But like the incident in the fair where I was last night, I recognize that these powerful emotions have come in, and I try and do something to control them. And then I hope most of the time cooler thinking prevails with me, certainly on the ideological level. These people, I would presume their IQs are at least 120 plus. They seem incapable of doing it. What's going on?
I don't think they're incapable. I think, but one of the things that you've already pointed out, they're not motivated to stop. They have other motivations, right?
Right. So then it becomes nefarious. Then, in which case,
yeah, I do think,
right?
I mean, as you pointed out in your article about, and as you were just mentioning about Russia, I mean, we can't discount the motivation to, like you said, sow discord, the need for power or the desire for power. And, there is power in this, right? There is power.
there's great power in there's great power in surfing that wave of rage. And I think, and I want to say that for the vast majority of people who are feeling that rage, it's innocent in the sense that they think that they're being rational, but they're not being. But the people who are really fanning the flames, well, we know it's reason. We can be sure that the Russians know what they're doing, right? Because if they didn't, they wouldn't be fanning both sides of the ideological divide, right? They'd just be fanning one. They'd think we agree with these guys, we want to bolster them as much as we can. The fact that they're doing both shows that there is no kind of rational ideological we believe in the good, not like under the Soviet Union, by the way. So, for example, the Soviet Union were very, very good at infiltrating leftist organizations and trying to bolster their strength. They didn't do the same on the right. Now that it's the KGB or the FSB as it's become is now controlling the apparatus of the Russian state. Now they're doing both because they don't have the kind of the former ideological drive of the Soviet Union. But the people, the thought leaders, we know that they're intelligent. We know that they're highly articulate. They know what they're doing. Is it reasonable to say that? Is it reasonable to say that, they might not know that they're being manipulated by the Russians, but they must know that the left is not this monstrous bloc. Well, here's why they must know, right? For years, they have complained, and I agree with them 125%, that just because you lean right, or even if you're not sufficiently left-wing enough, that doesn't mean that you're a fascist.
Right.
And this demonization of everybody who wasn't sufficiently left or everybody who was on the right as a fascist demonstrates not only that the people who are throwing that term about don't really know what fascism means, wouldn't be able to distinguish between German and Italian fascism, for example, but also that there's this monstrous othering, right, which is again the kind of the effective label that the article talks about. This it's less about us as a united group and more about them as an evil enemy, which is why they purge themselves all of the time, right? Because there's not really that kind of unity. Or that would be a good explanation anyway. So if that's what they're doing, they know that they've been labeled fascists. They've articulated what's wrong with them being labeled fascists. They've said, quite rightfully, I wouldn't support anything that Mussolini or Hitler stood for. I'm not against the mass murder of the Jews. I quite like Jewish people, and all of these reasonable things that they said. So they've said that, yes, there are fascists on the right, but the right is a group. There are people on the right that I agree with, some people that I disagree with. There is political diversity on the right. They've said all of these things for years. And they've said all these things over and over again to push the conclusion, which is perfectly reasonable and perfectly true, that we shouldn't be labeling the right fascists. And more recently, they've gone on to say, if we do label the right fascists, what that will lead to is people being dehumanized and being killed because they're seen to be this monstrous bloc. They've said this. And now they're doing it. Now they're doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So I at this point, I'm willing to be charitable. I understand that the vast majority of people who don't engage with ideas, they're just going along with the anger, and it's maybe innocent is the wrong word.
And fear, not just anger, but also fear.
And fear. Kind of two sides of the same coin. But I'm willing to forgive them, but I'm less willing to forgive these people who were so good at articulating all of the problems when they applied to them. And I agreed with them wholeheartedly. But now are saying, well, look, just as the woke left or people on the woke left did to us, people not just on the far right, but people on the moderate right,
and
we
moderate
will now
left.
do to the... and moderate left too. Yeah, but they would be excluded. I'm trying to get inside the thinking of the kind of right, because it was the moderate left too. we will now do to the left, and how long will it be that the moderate right as well will be excluded by this group?
Right.
And this is why I'm calling them woke right, because they are woke. Right, the woke left, and I talk about this in the article. The woke left believed that they had hit upon this hidden system of bigotry and biases that had infiltrated society, that was working sometimes on a conscious level by the thought leaders, but far more commonly in this unconscious way, and that their job was to awaken people into this reality. In order to fight oppression. Now, too, we have the same thing on the right, that, you're deluded if you think that the left are nice people that can be reasoned with. They might give you the illusion that that you can reason with them. You might be able to sit down and have a coffee, but they're planning to murder you. And this is not hyperbolic. Matt Walsh, one of the most leading figures in conservatism in America, literally said that they want to murder him and his family. And he didn't say the extreme left. He didn't say wokeys and Marxists. And it
Or a
wouldn't be true for
particular person or small group of people. No,
the left, them.
Yeah. Every left person. And I told you, I don't even know who this person is. But
you want to kill him, Elizabeth, as far as he's concerned, because you lean left.
Apparently, I didn't even know it.
No, and our friend Pam is, Pam is plotting to murder people. I didn't know that she was plotting, but these are the crazy arguments. And the thing is, Elizabeth, or Mike, because I would say I kind of lean right these days. By me not agreeing with Matt Walsh, I am either deluded, or, as I'm sure they're going to say, I'm actually a secret leftist myself. In fact, they do say I'm a secret leftist myself. I'm a secret leftist myself, and I know that in order to plot with you, in order to murder Matt Walsh and his ilk. This is a mirror. Yeah. This is a mirror. Yeah. They are woke to a new reality. They deserve the name woke right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things that pretty consistently, it's a lot. It's just there's a unity. There's in a way, an odd comfort in having an enemy, a common enemy. And I think that in this chaos, sometime, unfortunately, maybe it's the default is to look for a common enemy instead of a common friend. And that maybe that will bring, a group of people together. I mean, look at what happened after September 11th, right? And this has been brought up. This is not, like me being so insightful, but other people have brought it up. It's like, after that, most of us remember what it felt like to be an American after 9/11, and this unique sort of, to that generation. It certainly has happened in many other times.
It wasn't just to be an American, right? There were the newspapers in the United Kingdom were covering, saying we're all Americans now.
Right.
And just as this incident in America with Charlie Kirk, it's not just America, right? It's reverberating far beyond America.
And so, but to have this common enemy, whoever it was, and at the time we didn't know, who had flown planes into, the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and everything. And let's not forget the plane that was, taken down in Pennsylvania, prevented from probably flying into DC. What that felt like. And there is, I think, a common longing for that. And I wonder if that longing isn't sort of being translated into this common enemy kind of thing. It's like,
Can we say hijacked? Is it fair to say hijacked? Because what you're talking about is probably an adaptive philosophical trait, an adaptive psychological trait. That if you are a group of Homo sapiens and you're being attacked by another group, that you bond together to form loyalty, and that increases the survival chances of each individual member of the group, right?
Right.
So we're talking about something that is an adaptive trait. and has expressed itself adaptively during World War II. That the peoples of Western Europe and United States felt a shared sense of belonging, not just as Americans, but also as Western Europeans and with these other peoples, because there was that kind of biological and cultural link with France and Italy, and and so that inspired people to fight back against a kind of a new ideological monster that was threatening liberal democracy and the American stroke Western way of life. So that was an adaptive psychological mechanism then, World War One, World War Two, the Cold War, and now it's being hijacked. Is it fair to be saying it's being hijacked?
I
I mean,
mean, yeah,
I lean towards hijacked,
yeah,
and the difference is that by using the word hijacked, I'm putting agency in there. I'm saying that I think that it's more likely that there are people that know exactly what they're doing here.
right, right. And so we have people whose, I mean, whose fears and anxieties have been heightened, right? And are ready for an explanation for that, and it would be nice if we could all come together and, I don't know, to fight together as a world to save the world from overheating and, from drought
The
and from
forces of ideological
starvation.
division as well, and the
Yeah,
people who are driving this. So yeah, I mean, it's really, really difficult to escape the conclusion that there aren't people who know exactly what they're doing
mhm.
and are stoking this and are essentially malevolent actors
Yeah, yeah.
who
I
know
mean,
that
we
they're
are
damaging America and the West more broadly, and
right.
are dressing themselves up in the attire of patriotism, and they wave a crucifix and a star-spangled banner and claim to be the defenders of America and everything that is American and American values when they're actually tearing the Republic apart.
Mhm.
I've written about this. I don't know if you read my articles on the Christian nationalist philosophers. I wrote an article on. There are two leading kind of Christian nationalist philosophers. One of them is called Patrick Deneen. The other one's called Yoram Hazany. Yoram Hazany is very much like kind of I'm the biggest intellect in the room. I'm a bruiser. He's a real pugilist. He'll take anybody on, and he said he'd take anybody on. And then I dropped my article on New Discourses, which I know he read, and he just disappeared. Had nothing to say at all. Yeah. So no, I can't. I really think that these are nefarious characters.
Um, yeah, and I wish we could podcast about it and it would help.
Yeah. It does. It does feel like it. It has felt like for a while, hasn't it? Like, that phrase from Shakespeare, "Something wicked this way comes."
Yeah.
It does feel like you and I. What I don't know, it was a bit different from you because I think your awakening came with your cancellation. Awakening, Christ! Now I'm sounding weird.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Whereas for me, it happened before. I knew that
Mhm.
something ugly was coming, and I saw all the signs and I predicted it. Right before anybody ever came for me.
I was blissfully unaware.
Right. But now that you've been through that hell, you can't help but have seen all of the signs for some time now that there is something on the right that is monstrous, and for all the same reasons is coming. And now I think this could well be its George Floyd moment.
Mhm.
In the sense that the woke left were already powerful before that happened, before George Floyd happened.
Right.
But that kind of propelled them into the foreground. I mean, I think that I don't think there's going to be rioting in American streets, by the way. But I think that this is the kind of the moment on the right in which this monster appears. I'll try and stop it. I'm in a much better position to try and stop it now than I was when I, was just doing my master's degree in education and didn't have the confidence to write for this magazine and that one. At least I've got magazines who'll publish me, and then I've got two right-leaning magazines, commentary being the big one, and Providence being another right-leaning magazine, who will also publish me. Providence published a big rant I made against Donald Trump and kind of his abandonment of American principles and of liberal democracy. So at least there are forces on the right that are already geared up to try and take this movement on. So
Yeah,
what's that?
to I guess promote diversity within the in-group.
Yeah, well, I mean, but the thing is, I would say that these people are not right wing. These people are not conservative. There is nothing conservative.
Right.
What is the point? What? One of the problems I had with woke left people was that I would encounter them and they generally hadn't read or didn't understand not just the key texts, but the core philosophical basis for their whole worldview. They were woefully ignorant of it.
And that is true.
It's true now.
Yes, of the right.
So
yes,
what is what is the point of conservatism? Well, the clue's in the name.
Right.
To conserve. So the idea is we've got these institutions. They are flawed. Yes, there are people on the left that can point out A, B, and C problems with them. B and C might be wrong. A is correct. It's something that the left have identified. It's something that we need to reform. But that nevertheless, in spite of these flaws, these institutions deliver us this wonderful society that we continue to exist in. Even today, having gone through the rages of the woke left and the woke right, the United States of America is still a better place to live than Russia or China. In spite of the woke right trying to think that Russia and China are better than America, which is bonkers. But by any measure, America at its absolute worst, America could continue to drift into decline for decades, and it would still be far better than those places. So the point of a conservative would be to say, well, look, it's the glass is half full ideological outlook. Yes, there are these things that we need to challenge, and we need to prune, and we need to change the institutions in order to meet the challenges of the time. But we don't need revolution, and we certainly don't need bloodshed. Because just look at how much better what we have is than what exists elsewhere. That's why we conserve. That's why we call ourselves conservative. That's the basic thing. If you're talking about revolution, you forget about, you might say, okay, I want a smaller government, family values, the Christian state. That's all superficial. I'm not saying that your faith is superficial to you as an individual, but in terms of your political outlook, it absolutely is superficial, not least because Jesus himself said that we give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God. So there is the separation of church and state. So you don't really even get a justification for Christian nationalism in the Bible. So, if you're going to try and argue that, you're not really being close to your faith. So yeah, you are being superficial in that application of your faith. But these so-called conservatives do not understand what conservative means. They haven't even thought about, or if they have, and here's the worst thing, they do know what it means and they don't care, right? That they do know that they're far closer to Bolsheviks, far closer to Maoists, far closer to Jacobins, not in terms of the symbols that they're carrying, but again, the symbols are superficial. The hammer and the sickle and the Star-Spangled Banner are simply symbols, right? What they want to do is to tear up the very fabric of the United States in this kind of delusional dream that they can somehow build something better out of the wreckage. This is the whole thing behind Doge, right? Government waste. Is it a problem? Can Elon Musk fix some of the problems? Yeah, maybe. But by taking a fucking chainsaw, and the chainsaw's only barely metaphorical, right? He actually had the chainsaw. He was walking around with a chainsaw. To things you're going to do far more damage. Can you cut a cancer out with a chainsaw? Yes. Can you cut a cancer out with a chainsaw without killing the patient? No. you know, this revolutionary, reckless ideology, there's nothing conservative about it. And I wish these people would just say, okay, fine, we abandon conservatism. We're not conservatives, because they're not. And this is the point that I've tried to make in some of my articles, that none of these people are conservative. They're anti-conservative, and they're actually left-wing radicals. They're left-wing radicals in the original sense of how it was first conceived of by Edmund Burke when he was criticizing the Jacobin movement in France, the revolutionary movement, who looked at their own regime, saw only the negatives, and thought that they could tear something up and build something beautiful and perfect in its place. And it resulted in appalling bloodshed. And this is exactly what they're doing. There is nothing conservative about them. And they either don't understand conservative philosophy, or sadly, as more likely with the thought leaders, they do, but they don't care. That they have hijacked it for nefarious reasons, for power, for clicks and likes. And how successful am I going to be in stopping them? I'll try. I'm in a better position than I was before, but probably not very.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we are back together and talking about these kinds of things again. So I look forward to the next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values, a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear.